Okay. All right. So, hello, everybody. And today I am welcomed by a woman who has many of my favorite qualities. She is feisty, she is fearless, and she is fabulous. So, I know her well. I knew her well from afar because she's a titan of the content industry. And then I'm lucky enough to work with her now. We sit on a board together. So, welcome to my podcast, Lorraine Heggessey. And just
Thanks,
by way of
Tracy.
introduction, by way of introduction, I mean, you have been a trailblazer in so many different ways, but just, I mean, I can't believe this is all one woman. So, the first female controller of BBC One and responsible for things like Dancing with the Stars and massive, just massive hits. CEO of the independent production company Talkback Thames, which is humongous. Founder and executive chair of Boom Pictures. CEO of the Royal Foundation and the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and the chair of the very, very prestigious Grierson Trust. I mean, my first question, Lorraine, is when people meet you for the first time who don't know you, what do you say you do?
It's difficult now because I do a lot of things. Normally you're defined by the one thing you do. So you're CEO of this or producer of that or whatever. Whereas now I have more of a portfolio. And some of what I do is pro bono, which makes it even more complicated. So, chairing the Grierson Trust is something I do for free. I'm trustee of a local charity here, Pitshanger Manor and Gallery, which is a renovated country house. It was Sir John Soane's country house. And then I, do the Channel 4 work. So I sit on the Channel 4 Growth Fund board and I help Channel 4 to decide which companies to invest in, independent production companies to invest in. And when they do invest in those companies, I'm then available as an advisor to those companies. Plus I do keynote speaking on all sorts of things, from leadership to managing your career to getting the best out of the talent that works for you and things like that. So it is a bit of a mouthful describing it. And I find that you get very hung up, actually, like part of your identity is bound up with what you do, or has always been for me. And it is quite difficult when you do that transition from, if you like, being one thing to doing lots of things. And almost like you feel like you need to justify yourself a bit more. I think I've got over that now, but so now I just sort of say, rather than saying what I do, I just say, oh, I've got a portfolio. And I don't go into
Yes.
detail unless people ask.
Yes. And I think you raised such a good point, is that so for so many of us, our self-worth and self-esteem is wrapped up in our title and maybe our job salary. And you've had like the biggest titles out there. And who are you, if you had to say, who are you underneath all of those titles?
I mean, I'm Lorraine. That is the thing, is that in the end, I think being yourself in whatever role you're in is really important, and being true to yourself and true to your values. And as soon as you start to try to think that you have to act like something because you are in a given role or a given position, that's when you come a bit unstuck, because these high profile roles, senior executive roles, if you like, they are challenging enough as it is without having to be something or pretend to be something that you're not. And so I think you might have to moderate your style, definitely. And I have had to do that sometimes, to just knock off some of the rough edges, if you like. But being essentially who I am and the person I am, and not, I guess, getting seduced by your own hype or seduced by the flattery that can come with a title. I mean, I remember somebody very senior at the BBC saying to me that, when he got this amazing role of director of television, he said, well, my jokes have never been so funny before. Suddenly everybody laughs at your jokes and everybody thinks that everything you say is amazing. Whereas the day before, when you were Joe Blown, nobody really gave a damn. And I think I've always sort of remained quite grounded in my family, with my friends, and not kind of got into this seduction of the power that I might wield at any given time.
Yeah, very wise. And that does sound very grounded and very, I mean, I think it takes a lot of confidence to be yourself. So when were you always like that? Would you mind taking us back to a picture of either the teenage Lorraine or the child Lorraine?
I think I always had quite strong views and I wasn't afraid to voice them. So, when I was when I was at school, when I went to my secondary school, girls used to have to wear ankle socks, grey or white ankle socks, all year round. And I used to get chapped legs and I thought it was ridiculous. So I got up a petition to say that we should be allowed to wear grey or white knee-length socks over flesh-coloured tights. And, this was when I was in my first year at senior school. And I've always been prepared, I guess, to stick my head above the parapet. And I think the thing in television, when I was a trainee and I was on Newsnight and we would have the morning editorial meeting and everybody was expected to come up with ideas for that night's show. And it didn't matter whether you were the most senior producer in the room or, in my case, the most junior person in the room, you were expected to come up with ideas and you were expected to have a voice and say something. And if you did come up with an idea, you'd probably have to make that idea happen for that night's show. So you also had to deliver. And I think there's those sort of two things. First of all, not being afraid to push yourself forward and to put forward your ideas. And also, if you do have those ideas, you've then got to step up to the plate and make them happen. And there is nothing like the discipline of a live nightly news program, because if you don't deliver, there's going to be a 10-minute hole on the air that night. So you can't say, well, I couldn't persuade anybody to do an interview or I couldn't find this out or whatever. You have to make it happen. And I think having that grounding very early on was very valuable for me and taught me lots of important lessons.
Yeah, I mean, so it feels like, that stick of rock, if we cut you in half, there is fearless and feisty all the way through it then. So even from a very early age. But did you have very did you have supportive parents, or what or did you have to rebel? Like where did that come from? That feistiness at such an early age? You must have been 11 when you were campaigning for knee-length socks.
It's ridiculous, isn't it? Free the ankle sock one. My family is the opposite of me. I mean, they don't want to be noticed. They don't. They're not very gregarious or outward going. I think my father always expected me to achieve. So that is perhaps where the drive comes from. So I was expected to do well. I was expected to do good grades. Whatever ambition I had, and I always had an ambition, which changed during the course of my childhood and teenage years, but I always had one. My father would encourage me to do it. So at one stage, I wanted to be a surgeon. He's like, yes, you can be a surgeon. At another stage, I wanted to be the first female Prime Minister of Britain. And he would say, yes, you can be the first female Prime Minister of Britain. So he never said, no, I don't think you can do that, or that ambition is above your station. So the thing is, my father is Egyptian, or was Egyptian, and came from a very different culture. And I think found it quite difficult to have a modern Western daughter. And when I look back and analyse it, I often think he just treated me as if I was his eldest son. And there was that thing, like there was never any. So my mother didn't go to university. She left school at 16 and she went to work. She went to work. And my father did go to university, but there was never any question but that I would go to university. There was never any question but that I would have a career. And he obviously would have preferred it if I'd gone into one of the more traditional careers. So if I had been a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant, which he was, that would have pleased him. When I said I wanted to go into journalism, he wasn't happy. And he was very authoritarian. And I had to rebel quite a lot against him and dig my heels in. And we did have, some nasty rows. But I think I wouldn't be who I am if I hadn't had the father that I had. And, I loved him and I respected him. But there could be quite a lot of tension there because I was very strong-willed. And also because of this expectation that was on me. And I think I have that in myself now. I expect a lot of myself. And people often say that I'm competitive. I'm not actually competitive with other people. I'm competitive with myself. And if I don't feel I'm doing as well as I could do, I get irritated with myself.
Yeah. Yeah. So what that sort of brings to mind sort of the inner critic, or the some people call it imposter syndrome. I doubt you've ever suffered from imposter syndrome, have you?
I have all the time, really. I think almost everybody does. And certainly in a way from not feeling like I fit in, because I didn't go to a public school and I didn't know anybody else who worked in journalism or TV. And I remember when I went to university, I went and I did not know a soul. I went to Durham. I didn't know anybody when I got there. And all these people seem to know each other. I'm like, how do they know each other? And they, this whole public school network. So I think there's that thing of not necessarily feeling like you fit in or you are one of the crowd, so to speak. So I think I feel that more. And then also, I know what I don't know. I mean, I always say to people, don't tell anybody what you don't know, because there's lots of things you do know, and emphasize the things you do know, then there's no need to let anybody. But of course, you yourself know what you don't know. And because I've always pushed myself out of my comfort zone, I know I'm out of my comfort zone. I know I don't know stuff. I was often doing items for Newsnight on something I knew absolutely nothing about, and you've got to do a fast load of research and you've got to brief yourself. The thing about being a journalist is you become a 5-minute expert on a whole range of subjects, but ask you to talk for more than 5 minutes on that, and you can't. So, there is that thing of, learning enough to get by, and I guess blagging it. And I think we all blag it. And some of us are better at blagging than others. And of course, by the time you get to my age, you do have a lot of experience behind the blag. So I suppose you slightly blag less because you have, you know more, you've done more, you've learned more.
And so that's so interesting to hear that, you had that imposter syndrome. And for somebody who has had some of the most respected and greatest jobs in the establishment and in big institutions, how did you cope with that imposter syndrome of not being presumably male and Oxbridge educated and yada, yada, yada?
I think there's a thing, so it's quite interesting. I didn't ever see myself as becoming a BBC executive. I left the BBC, the BBC trained me, and then I left and I worked outside the BBC for 10 years, largely as a freelance. And the great thing about being a freelancer is you have to hustle for work, you have to put yourself out there, and also people don't pigeonhole you. So in big organisations, people pigeonhole you. I was a current affairs producer. Once I became a freelancer, I was a producer of factual programs, and I would get asked to do a whole range of things, all sorts of documentaries, magazine programs, you name it. So you become less typecast, and I think that's another useful lesson. And I slowly got sucked back into the BBC and ended up working as an executive producer in BBC Science. And when I was there, I went on a leadership development course. I went on it actually to have a rest because I had 2 small children. And I just launched a show called Animal Hospital, which was a huge success and had been really quite a grueling schedule. I was editor of a program called QED, which was a documentary strand that used to go on BBC One, which was about, 10 or 12 programs a year. And I was also executive producing a landmark documentary series called The Human Body. So I'd been working really hard. And when I was asked if I would like to go on a leadership development program, and it was like 3 days in a hotel, I thought, fantastic, that whole thing of just being able to drop your towels on the bathroom floor and somebody else would pick them up and make the bed and all that sort of stuff. But of course, it was incredibly hard work because you really had to think about yourself and think about yourself as a leader. And as part of that, we did the 360-degree feedback, which is I always find it deeply scary. And I was allocated a coach to give me my analysis of the feedback. And this coach, who's actually now one of my best friends, looked at me and said, do you realize with this feedback, you could go to the top of the organization? And I just looked at her in utter disbelief. And I said, there is no way that is going to happen. I'm not like the people who get on in this organization. I'm not tall. I'm not male. I didn't go to Oxbridge. I didn't go to public school. I'm not any of those things. And she just looked at me and she said, you're right. You're not any of those things. But what makes you think they might not appreciate you for what you are? What makes you think they might not love you and want you for what you bring to the table? Because as you've said, they've already got loads of those other people like you described. So that was one thing that just planted a seed, and it took a long time for that seed to germinate, but nevertheless, the seed had been planted. And then the other thing was when I started to see people, mostly men, but not only men, going for jobs. And I knew I was as good as them, if not better than them. And I'm thinking, he's going for that? He thinks he can go for that? Hang on a minute. And I was actually asked to apply for BBC One the time it came up before I did apply for it. And I thought, I did that classic female thing. I'm not good enough. I haven't ticked all the boxes. I don't know this. I don't know that. I haven't done this. I haven't done that. And I thought, I can't go for it. There's no way I could do that job. And somebody who had applied to it came round to have a drink with me one evening to pick my brains before their interview. And we sat in the garden, and I told the person, what I thought. And after they left, my husband just looked at me and went, "You just gave them more information than they had. That you knew far more about that job than they know. How come you're not going for it?" And I said, no, it's fine. I'm not ready for it. And actually that person didn't get the job either. But the point was, and I think this is an interesting thing with women, and it's something that I've observed anecdotally. I've not done the research to back it up. So if you've got some statisticians listening, I'm sorry to them. But on the whole, women go for jobs 2 years after they're ready for them, and men go for jobs 2 years before they're ready for them. And they don't quite have that sort of self-censorship thing. And the next time when BBC One came up, I thought, well, do you know what? If I don't go for it now, they won't ask me again. So I just have to plunge in. I'm so glad I did. And the truth is, nobody ever ticks all the boxes. Nobody's, for those big jobs, nobody's ever the finished article. And that's why you have teams. You have teams to supplement and augment the skills you don't have, and, to bring nuance to the decisions that you make. So you don't have to know everything. You just have to know enough, and you have to be good enough.
I love that, Lorraine, because it's like two things that really jumped out to me is that one, that coach saying to you, what that coach did to you was like break your frame of reference about what was possible, that she had a vision. She could see you as at the top at the very, very top. And I think in so many instances, like if you have somebody who champions you and can really see that in you, it sort of unlocks, like you said, it sort of sowed a seed that came back up the other time. So championing people really is transformative, I think. And then the other thing is just really what I think what you're saying, or how I reinterpret that is, if not you, then who? And in your case, you kind of saw people who weren't as talented as you. So it's such a brilliant thing to hear from you, And what would
or at least I
you know,
was as talented as them, if you know what I mean. So it's like, even if they were more talented, even if I wasn't more
but
talented,
in the case of
I was
in the
as
case of
talented.
in the case of your husband saying you've just given him all the answers, I presume it was a him. That's often the case, isn't it? Yeah, I love that. And so
But
what
the other thing about the coach is that it was somebody I'd never met before, and it was somebody whose profession it was to make those kind of judgments. And she made those judgments so that somehow it had more validity, if you like.
Yes.
Because again, I think sometimes when you're asked to go for a job or apply for a job or whatever, which in big organizations you might be, there's often a different agenda at play. It's not about necessarily what's best for you. It's about what's best for the organization, or what would suit the organization at that particular moment in time. And I always say sometimes those two things are aligned. What suits the organization suits you. But sometimes they're like, oh, wouldn't you really like to go and work in Outer Mongolia? Meaning they really need somebody to go and manage Outer Mongolia. Be incredibly good for your career. And one of the things they say is, don't ever take a job because you think it's good for your career, because it may not be. The person who said, if you go and work in Outer Mongolia for 2 years, we are then going to, promote you and blah, 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 may not be there in 2 years' time. Or somebody else may have come along who's flavour of the month, who gets that job instead of you. So if you really want to go and work in Outer Mongolia, that's fantastic. Go and do it. But go and do it because you want to do it, not because you think it's going to get you up the next step on the ladder. I've often said I've gone for short-term satisfaction rather than long-term gain. And if you look back at the early part of my career, I really zigzagged, and each zig and zag probably took me slightly higher on a diagonal, but it wasn't a ladder, it wasn't a vertical upright thing.
And was And Lorraine, was that strategic? Have you been strategic about your career?
Not at all. Not at all. As I say, I went for jobs that I thought I would love and enjoy, that felt like the right challenge at the right time. And only that, I went for short-term satisfaction rather than long-term gain. And in the end, I got long-term
But that
gain.
that 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 yeah, that in itself is a kind of strategy, isn't it? Is it what motivated you to take the next job? What were you kind of looking for in the next assignment?
Um, well, usually to be challenged, to do something that I would enjoy. I do think enjoyment for me is the key thing. I can't say it was a strategy because it wasn't as complex as that. It's like, do I want to do this job or don't I? It was as simple as that. And also, I would find I would get to a stage where I become restless in my job. If I'm too
Yes.
comfortable, I need to move on to the next thing. There would be
Yes.
that, just like that something would happen. I wouldn't be unhappy or anything, but I'd start to get this feeling inside that it was time for me to start thinking about what next. And that might take a few months or
Yeah.
even a year to work out, or to get that opportunity to create the next opportunity for myself.
Yes. And a lot, I think, what I notice about a lot of very driven, ambitious people who like big challenges and like to learn, etc., that is often that they sort of throw them over their shoulder, never to be looked at again, and are on to the next thing. Have you been able to enjoy your successes along the way, or are you always looking for the next thing?
No, I'm not always looking for the next thing at all. I think that's the thing, is about taking a job I think I'll love and enjoy. So then I totally immerse myself in that role, and I'm not even thinking about what next. I'm not thinking about it until I start to get that inner feeling that maybe it's
Yes.
time to move on. But at the time, I have no idea what I'll be doing next. And if
Yeah.
that's the thing, is about finding that job that is going to challenge and stretch me, and I'm going to love. Because we spend so much time at work. We spend most of our time at work. So if we're not enjoying it, what are we doing there? And I think there's that thing, is you have to take your
Mm.
destiny into your own hands. You have to take your career into your own hands. And if you're not happy, do something about it. And it's only your responsibility to do that. It's not the HR department, it's not the organization that you work for or anything else. It's all down to you. And
Mm.
don't hold yourself back from that, because people end up saying, oh, I've got to pay the mortgage, or I need my pension, or I want the maternity leave, or whatever it is. Everything else will fall into place if you do the job you love, and you will be able to cope. And I've taken huge risks in my time, financial as well as career, and it's kind of worked out, because in the end, I think there's a sort of, if you're doing what you love, it works out. If you're doing what you love, you will do it well.
Yeah. And you're a busy family woman, and you mentioned two children earlier. How what were there any tricky bits in that? And what have sort of been the career challenges to having many different responsibilities in work and outside of work?
Well, I was very lucky because my husband is a musician, and when we were first married, he used to gig in the evenings. He's a jazz piano player, so he used to play in various bars and clubs and what have you in the West End. And so he was at home in the day, and I was at home in the evening. So I didn't have all the childcare anxieties that a lot of people have, because I had my husband looking after our children. And over time, he just took over more and more of those responsibilities as my career accelerated. And he enjoyed, being a stay-at-home dad. So I had that anchor. And I wasn't that thing of like, I've got to rush home to be home for the nanny. We had a nanny who used to arrive when Ron was gigging. We had a nanny that used to arrive at 5 o'clock in the evening, and she would stay until I got home. So it was all fine. And I didn't have that guilt of my children not being looked after by their parents that I know some women suffer from. So, that side was easy. But of course, as the mother, you want to be enough of a presence in your child's life. And, you want to be there for them. And, it's so easy now with FaceTime and all those things. But, you know, when I was doing it, you know, mobiles had kind of only just come in. So it wasn't as easy to have that. And, you know, there would be times when I would dash home to read a bedtime story before going out for an evening engagement, you know, things like that, trying to juggle and make things worse. And in fact, the only big row I had with Greg Dyke as Director General when I was running BBC One was over something he wanted me to attend that I said I wouldn't attend because it was my daughter's 10th birthday. And I had this thing that on my daughter's birthdays, I would take them to school. I'd then go to work and I would try and be home early so that, you know, we could have some kind of birthday tea together or go out or whatever it was that we were going to do on that particular day. And Greg had a big conference organised for the top 300 people in the BBC in Birmingham as part of his big change initiative called Making It Happen. And obviously, as controller of BBC One, he wanted me to be there. Now, the way I looked at it was there were going to be 300 people there. Who was going to notice if I wasn't there? And my daughter would know if I wasn't there on her 10th birthday. So I said to Greg, look, I'm really sorry, I can't come. And he completely flipped out. Now, it turned out that he had just come back from China and he had terrible jet lag and he'd also had dental work and he had terrible pain. Anyway, I didn't know that. So he got very cross with me and, you know, accused me of, you know, not exactly shirking, but, you know, kind of shirking. And I got very upset about this and refused to give in and ended up in tears. Now, I'm one of these people who I don't cry very often about my own life. I cry at the drop of a hat at a stupid film, but I don't cry about what happens to me. And when I do start crying, I can't stop. So, and by this stage, we were all in glass offices. So I'm sobbing my heart out and everybody else on the 6th floor can see that I'm crying and nobody knows what's going on because they don't know I've had this row on the phone with Greg. And then my PA comes in and asks me what's the matter. So I explain. So he then rings Ron, who rings me to try and placate me. And I didn't give in. And then my boss was Jana Bennett, who was director of television, and she found out what was going on. And she then spoke to Greg, who found out that he had terrible toothache and jet lag and all the rest of it. And also said, look, you know, Lorraine worked so hard, which it was a 24/7 job and I was always working. You know, how can you accuse her of this? And so we came to a compromise, which was that I would go to the first day of the conference, stay for the dinner. Greg's chauffeur would then drive me back to London. I would then go and take my daughter to school the next morning, give her presents in the morning, take her to school, and then the chauffeur would drive me back to the conference. But it was actually a really important signal that I sent, you know, being prepared to stand up for what I saw as very important and for my values. And, you know, for the other women who worked in television at that time, I think quite important that I was prepared to make that sort of stand. Because certainly when I started, if senior women did have children, and there weren't that many senior women anyway, they certainly didn't talk about them. And they certainly wouldn't have ever missed anything. And I think that thing of working out your priorities for men as well as women, because there are certain occasions in your child's life where you're either there or you're not there. You know, you've either seen them in the school play or singing in the school choir or playing a netball match or whatever it might be, or you haven't, and it's binary. And a lot of work meetings you can catch up on. Not everything, and obviously if you have to travel abroad and if it's a board meeting, it's more tricky, but a lot of things you can catch up on. And my hint to women as well is that when you dash in, because you're normally dashing in at the last minute, make yourself visible so your child sees you, because there is nothing worse. You see your child looking all around, trying to find you, and you're hidden at the back. So I think the thing is, you know, get yourself into a prominent position and make sure that they've clocked you so they know you've made the effort.
So that's like making the big star entrance. I'm here. Yeah. And actually, I mean, presumably have you, in terms of being heard and seen in your career, have you had any particular issues with that or any particular strategy with that? You know, like they always say, like, oh, the lean in the meetings and all of that kind of thing. What's your approach to that?
Well, I think particularly when you first start going to board meetings, or anything, any sort of step up is really quite difficult. And there seems to be a thing where women say something and people don't hear them. I don't quite understand how it happens. And then 5 minutes later, a man says something. They go, oh, yes, as John said. And you're thinking, but I said that. I got very good advice from my coach when I started going to. John Burt was Director General of the BBC when I first got a senior position, and I went to his board meetings, and they were deeply intimidating. And he was a deeply scary person. He was very rigorous, very exact, quite demanding and intimidating. I found him intimidating. And my coach gave me really good advice, and she said, when in doubt, just smile and say nothing, which is quite hard for me because I always have to say something. So, I did that. I did that thing of like, you look like you're actively engaging, your face is responding, so you're not like half asleep. And then you start to realize that the thing that you thought of saying, somebody else says. So probably that thing that you thought of saying wasn't so stupid after all, because it was a perfectly valid thing. So after a couple of meetings, you get a bit more comfortable and then you start voicing it. And then how you make yourself heard is tricky, because you don't want, when you've already said something and then a man says it 10 minutes later and they all start nodding in agreement, you don't want to say, yeah, but I just said that, because it sounds so petty. And a lot of it, I think, is about preparation and the way you say it, making sure that you say it in a succinct and quite punchy way. A lot of it is about engaging the eye contact of the chair of that meeting, and where you sit in a meeting is quite important. If you're right at the far end of the table, it's really difficult. All those little things mount up, I think, into helping you effectively get your voice heard.
Yeah. I think that's so true. And I think it's also just say something. I think it's just like, just practice saying something, even if it's like to support somebody else or what else, whatever. So that's brilliant. I love that. And what about God, sorry. Were you about to say something?
No, it's all right.
No,
it's fine. Go on.
What about what would you say have been career obstacles for you, if any, and how have you navigated them?
I don't really know, because you never really know what the obstacles are. And I think, I myself was very resistant to taking a senior managerial role. I loved program making, and I stayed directly involved in program making for a long time. And for a long time did not want to go higher than executive producer, because I still wanted to be hands-on involved in the product. And I had a quite dim view, I think, of managers, if you like. And then out of the blue, it was suggested that I went for head of children's at the BBC, and it just appealed to me. It was unlike anything I'd ever done before. I had children in that age bracket, so short of me taking over Hamleys, it was probably the next best job I could have. And I'd actually been going to leave the BBC. I'd resigned. I had resigned already, and was going to go and join an independent production company as their head of factual, and got this suggestion out of the blue. And I'd agonized about leaving, because I'd loved my job in BBC Science, but I'd got that feeling that I'd told you about earlier, where I thought it's time to move on. I've kind of done this now. I'd like to do something else. And so doing head of factual at an indie seemed like a good thing to do. And the BBC had been struggling to find, I think, the right person to run children's. It had always been an internal appointment before within the children's department. I think they'd done a round of interviews and they just weren't happy with the people or whatever, just felt they wanted something different. And my head of department in science mentioned to the director of production that she knew that I hadn't yet signed my contract, although I'd resigned, when he was saying, children's. And before, the BBC had said, look, don't leave. We don't want you to leave. Why don't you become a head of department? I'm like, I don't want to be a head of department. Who would want to be a head of department? It's not for me. And yet children's was for me. I think I didn't want to be head of general features, or I didn't want to be head of documentaries for whatever reason. I just didn't. And children's was like having a whole miniature schedule. Because you had entertainment and you had drama and you had news and you had, like your own nationwide type program with Blue Peter and things like that. So it was a schedule in microcosm. And of course I discovered I absolutely loved being a head of department. It was about 300 people, and 300's a nice number to lead because you can get to know them all. You can sort of put your arms around them. But again, it was challenging because they'd never had anybody come in from the outside to run the department. And they, all thought they knew how to do things. And I guess I came in and shook things up quite a lot. And also because it was odd, but it was sort of, you were left to get on with it in children's, because it wasn't prime time telly. So we were even in our own building in the East Tower, which was a bit like a kind of a tower block. It was a rather unprepossessing tower block at Television Centre. So yeah, I could do my own thing, and that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed.
Lorraine, I was going to ask you about, so there you were, like you'd been a leader before, but now you had your own kingdom of children's. What is it, what was your or what is your leadership style? And what do you think are the the best qualities of a leader?
I think there are lots of different leadership styles, and it's difficult to say that one is better than another, because again, a lot of it depends on your own personality and preference. But what I try to be, you'd have to ask people who've worked for me whether it's true, but I think it is true. I've often had feedback to this effect. I try to be a very positive force. I like to create a very positive, happy working culture and an enabling culture as well, where people feel that they can do their best work, and very supportive. So I've never believed in the treat 'em mean, keep 'em keen philosophy of management. To me, I think you get the best out of people when they feel valued. So I try to make people feel valued. I try to praise them when they do well. I learned a lot, I think, from being a mother. And the great thing about being a mother is you always see the best in your children. And you want them to do well. You want them to be happy, and you want to support them in every way you can. And I think bringing those sort of softer skills, if you like, into the workplace are very valuable. And I think I've certainly found I've mellowed as I've got older. I think when I was really young, I was so hard trying to prove myself, particularly as a producer on Panorama, which was quite a hostile environment in lots of ways, and particularly for a young woman to be in. You're so defensive and you're so, on it that you're quite unforgiving of people. But I'm very forgiving of people now, maybe sometimes too forgiving, but I'd rather be that way than the other. And I think the thing is that a lot of about being a leader is about being, not doing. And we're all used to doing. And you have to learn to be. And a lot of it is about setting an example. And everything you do or say as a leader has an impact. Every single thing. Even more so than ever now that everybody is on chat or on social media. So the repercussions of your actions will reverberate throughout the organization. The kind of person you value and the behavior that you value and reward will reverberate throughout the organization. So those signals that you send are very, very powerful. And if you are valuing, if you like, the misbehaving toddler, that will send a message that people who behave like that can get away with it. And to me, it's no excuse that just because you're a high performer, you can get away with bad behavior. I think you have to be a high performer and you have to behave well. And that's not to say, obviously, sometimes people lose it. We all lose it sometimes. But you have to set certain standards. And if you look, I think a really good example recently was Dominic Cummings driving to Barnard Castle during lockdown and Boris Johnson not punishing him. In fact, accepting his rather pathetic explanation. And that, that kind of demoralized the whole country, who'd all been observing lockdown and gone through their own hardships and who'd frankly didn't believe Dominic Cummings' explanation. Yes. So, if you are constantly giving attention to those who might be good performers but also behave badly, then you send the message that is what you value. So, that...
And a lot of people, Lorraine, are frightened of conflict or frightened of difficult conversations. What has been your approach to that kind of thing? Like when what do you do when people are behaving badly, or, that there's somebody's like in conflict with you?
Well, nobody likes having difficult conversations. I've often felt very let down in the past where, a boss of mine has been supposed to be having a difficult conversation with somebody, maybe something I've raised, and then they haven't had the difficult conversation. So I know the pernicious effect it can have when things aren't dealt with. And my experience has been that the earlier you have those conversations, the better. So no bad situation ever gets better. It only gets worse. It only gets magnified. Your reaction to that situation only gets worse because you get more and more het up about it. So when you do eventually deal with it, your reaction might be disproportionate. So I think you have to nip things in the bud and deal with things early, unpleasant as that may be, or hard and difficult and challenging as it may be. And you have to be explicit. Because if you don't tell somebody, they don't know. If you don't explain to them that you don't find certain things they're doing acceptable, or the impact of their behaviour on others is X or Y, they won't know that you are not happy with it. And again, I think this thing of like, if you praise regularly, you earn the right to criticise. So the two, to me, go hand in hand. If you're not giving people regular feedback, then it will completely come out of the blue. It's no use waiting for the annual appraisal, and then suddenly there's this tirade of everything they're doing wrong. Like, hang on a minute, where did all this come? I had no idea you felt like that. And I remember I was editor of a program once in the independent sector, and we used to work in a disused shop, and it was open plan, quite a small office. And there was one person who used to arrive late to work every day, well after everybody else. Usually been out the night before, would be drinking, cans of Coke and what have you, to kind of ameliorate their hangover. Would chat on the phone a lot to their friends, which of course everybody knew. Was actually also very good at their job and would get the job done, but that behaviour was very disruptive. And, I was getting crosser and crosser, and I was shooting glances to this person every time they entered the office, like, won't they realise I'm upset? After a few weeks, I tackled them and I kind of exploded. I was like, I can't believe it. You arrive late every day. You do this, and they just looked at me and said, but why didn't you say? And I thought, yeah, why didn't I say? And after that, everything was fine. And, telepathy doesn't work as a management tool. They don't know what you're thinking. They won't see those glances. You have to say it. You have to be explicit. And I think it's the same in terms of what you expect of people. I mean, countless jobs I've had, in fact, almost every job I've had, nobody has ever sat me down at the beginning and told me what the job is, what I'm supposed to be delivering and what I'm supposed to do. You might get a few objectives, but that's not quite the same. And so I think being very explicit with people about what you expect is important, and giving regular feedback, both positive and constructively critical, is important.
It's such a great point. And what about a lot of people fear that people won't like them, or that they will be thought of badly by somebody. And I think that does inhibit people from doing the right thing. How do you, and you've had very, very public roles, very, very senior roles. So there must have been times when people did not agree with you, did not like what you were doing, et cetera, et cetera. How do you cope with that?
Well, you can't please all of the people all of the time, I'm afraid. And sometimes people won't like you. Not everybody likes everybody. I think they don't have to like you. They have to probably respect you, respect your judgment, know that, nobody gets it right all the time. And sometimes by, if you like, trying to be liked, you can end up losing everybody's respect. Because if you're so busy trying to be liked that you don't tackle the difficult issues, you just become a bit of a people pleaser, then people are like, why isn't she just getting on with it? Why isn't she tackling this? Why isn't she doing that? We can all see this needs to be done. Why isn't she doing it? And so, that has a detrimental effect. And, being a leader isn't necessarily about a popularity contest. I'd much rather people liked me. Of course I would. But I accept that I can't all the time. And, sometimes on BBC One, I had to cancel people's programs and they all hated me because I was taking away maybe their livelihood or their commission, or people wouldn't like the scheduling of it. And some people will accept that decision and some people won't accept it. And some people will take it incredibly personally and other people will realize it's purely professional. And I think, being professional to me is the key thing, and taking the decisions that it is incumbent upon you to take.
Yeah. And when you have made mistakes, if you have made mistakes, how do you treat yourself? Like, how do you react when you've made a mistake?
I think it's important to be honest about it, that you've made the mistake. I mean, I'm very much a glass half full. In fact, even like the glass is so full, it's more or less brimming over. So quite often when I've made mistakes, I tend to see the positive side of it. Either what I've learned or, I don't know, something good has come out of it, even if maybe overall it hasn't been a good thing. And I have to temper that a bit and try and be a bit more analytical and try and work out what's behind the mistake. But, I think fronting it up is important. Don't blame somebody else if it was your decision. And I think that is one of the things. I've always been prepared to stand or fall by my decisions. And I've always known I will stand or fall, especially in a high profile role like BBC One. If you make a very bad decision, you probably will lose your job. And that's it. But that doesn't mean, you can't shy away from making decisions because of that.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think it would stop most people in their tracks, but I think you just really seem to have this kind of like this faith and confidence in whatever that foundation is, even if it's shaky, that actually it's the right thing, and it will just take you to somewhere else that's positive. So that's it's such a wonderful way of looking at things. Because it means you don't live your life in terror of making a mistake. And then one of the we're getting to the end of this now. So I wanted to ask you, how do you measure success? Like for you, what is success?
It's very bound up with happiness to me. It's, how much am I enjoying this job? So it's a combination of happiness and being good at what I do, feeling that I'm succeeding at what I do, if you know what I mean, whatever those metrics might be. So that's really how I measure it, by how I feel about it.
Yeah, brilliant. And if you had like 3 golden rules for the way you sort of do things or live your life, or sort of like the 3 things that people should remember, or advice, etc., what might they be?
I don't know if I've got 3, but I definitely say don't hold yourself back. So I often think the biggest thing holding you back is you yourself. And it's very easy to externalize it and say it's because of A, B, C, or D. But there are all sorts of examples of people who've overcome huge obstacles and been really successful. So, it has to come from within you. So look within you before you start blaming external circumstances, and don't hold yourself back. Don't self-censor would be one. I think, be happy and have fun, enjoy what you do. Normally you are good at what you enjoy doing. That's the thing. So, that becomes a virtuous circle. And when that happiness starts to dwindle, or that enjoyment starts to dwindle for whatever reason, move on. Take your destiny into your own hands, which I guess is another one. It's a kind of a different version of the first one, is take your destiny into your own hands. Don't be passive. Don't be a passenger in your own career. Don't drift on the tide. Make conscious, positive decisions, whether that's to stay or whether that's to go. You might go through a process and you decide that actually you do want to stay in your job, but you want to change certain things about it. Or you might decide that actually what you do need to do is to move. And that might mean moving organization because your values don't fit in with that organization. Or it might mean staying within the organization and trying to find a different role, or it might be somehow changing the way you do your current role. But whatever it is, make those conscious decisions about it. And don't be unhappy, because life is too short. The one thing we've learned this last year is stuff will happen. So all that time you spend at work, you might as well make it enjoyable.
Yeah. Wonderful. And if you had like if you had a coat of arms and like one of those Latin inscriptions, what would it be to sum it all up?
Oh, I don't know.
Doesn't have to be in Latin.
Yes, it's a long time since I did Latin. But I think it will probably be positive and be happy. maybe be positive, be happy, and go for it.
Yeah. Lovely. Lorraine, thank you so much. That's so inspiring and so sort of practical advice there, and really encouraging, and I think I stand by what I said at the beginning. You are feisty, you are fabulous, and you are fearless, and it's just it's brilliant to talk to you, and brilliant to get inside your mind a little bit in terms of career confidence and fearless leadership. So it's just so inspiring, and thank you very, very much indeed. And just to say that, could you just give us your contact details? It's LorraineHeggessey.com to find out more about.
My website.
Yeah, I think it's LorraineHeggessey.com.
I think it is. I'll have to look it up. Hang on. Yeah, LorraineHeggessey.com, all one word.
Or people could link. Or people could link
in
with you.
I'm on LinkedIn, yeah, and I'm on Twitter at La Heggessey as my Twitter handle. At La Heggessey.
At La Heggessey. Brilliant. Excellent.
And thank you very much,
so
Tracy.
much, Lorraine.
Tracy, you've asked some great questions.
You're welcome.
And made me really think.